The Washington Summit Hall was packed, and the air felt heavy with formal words and hidden arrogance. Flags from 20 countries gently moved above the heads of world leaders. But it was clear who had the spotlight and who wasn't expected to say much. Vice President Kamala Harris stood confidently at center stage, delivering bold comments about global cooperation and patience. But everything changed when she casually turned toward the quiet man, sitting at the end of the long table. With a slight smirk in her voice, she said, "We have leaders who think posing is power. Statues and slogans won't fix the world's economy." The camera slowly turned to Ibrahim Traoré, who hadn't spoken yet, wearing a plain dark suit, with no medals or large team behind him. He sat still, hands folded, face calm. But people who knew him could feel his silence wasn't weakness, it was powerful. The American audience chuckled politely. Kamala leaned in, feeling confident. "You want to challenge the global system," she added, "then build something real, not just symbols." That's when Traoré stood up slowly, calm and steady, like someone who had been underestimated too many times to care anymore. No notes, no podium, no translator, just his voice. "Symbolism," he said, sharp but calm. "You mistake it for conviction. You call it posing when others choose not to bow down." The room went silent. Kamala raised an eyebrow, but Traoré kept going. "You say I'm not building. Every time your aid is taken away, we build another wall. Every embargo you place only makes us stronger. What you call defiance, I call building a future." He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. His words were clear, focused, and powerful, cutting through all the polished speeches. Then he added, "And you're right about one thing, we're not part of your system. We're building our own." A wave of surprise moved through the room. Kamala looked stunned for the first time, and Traoré didn't even use the microphone. In the press room, chaos broke out. Before he even sat back down, reporters were already typing, headlines flying across the internet. Clips of his calm but powerful response went viral within minutes. And one line stood out everywhere: "We're not part of your system. We're building our own." It wasn't just a quote, it was a bold challenge. And leaders from Washington to Brussels were paying attention. Backstage, Kamala Harris watched, the clip on a tablet, her jaw tight, fingers tapping her armrest as her aides stood nearby, clearly nervous. "He made you look caught off guard," one whispered. "He made me look like I underestimated a child." Kamala snapped, "And I didn't. I knew exactly who he was. What I didn't expect was that the world would love it." Later that evening, behind closed doors, she was still frustrated. Pointing at a frozen image of Traoré on screen, she said, "This man is turning resistance into a show. He doesn't build real partnerships, he builds defiance. And somehow that's enough to get applause." Meanwhile, across town in a quiet embassy meeting room, Traoré sat with his top advisor, Awa. "You didn't plan that line, did you?" she asked with a small smile. "No," Traoré said, sipping tea. "She gave it to me." He wasn't celebrating. There was no time. He knew exactly what had been set in motion. "Tomorrow they'll say I'm dangerous," he said softly. "Next week they'll call me disruptive. But I'll take that if it means our people stop waiting for someone else to build what we need." Awa nodded. "Then we need to show them something real." He leaned forward and pointed to a map of the Sao, marked with symbols for irrigation projects, solar farms, tech hubs, real projects already underway. "This isn't rebellion," he said. "It's construction." The next morning, while Kamala tried again on CNN saying Africa needs partners, not pride, Traoré boarded a flight back to Ouagadougou. He had no plans to argue on camera. He had work to do. And the best response to words wasn't more words, it was progress. The airstrip in Ouagadougou was hot and dry when his plane landed. There were no red carpets, no ceremonies, just a few ministers holding notebooks, concern on their faces. The headlines had reached them too. But Traoré didn't waste time with greetings. He pointed straight to the convoy. "Take me to Zone 7. One aide blinked. "Sir, you mean the pilot region?" "Yes," Traoré said firmly. "We start today." Zone 7 was a dry stretch of land 20 miles outside the capital, the kind of place Kamala Harris had described as empty posturing. But Traoré was ready to prove her wrong by building something real. right in front of the world. When the convoy arrived, the scene looked like a place full of broken promises. There was a half-finished canal, a rusted irrigation pipe, and stacks of unused solar panels sitting under dusty covers. But the people were there, young men and women, village elders, mothers holding babies, and curious teenagers with notebooks. They had watched the summit. They had seen Traoré's response. And now they were here, waiting to see if his words meant something real. Traoré climbed onto the back of a truck and spoke without a microphone. Some say we need the world's permission. Others say we should wait for aid. But I say we build with our hands or we don't eat. It starts here, today. The crowd clapped not because they were told to, but because it felt real. His team got to work. Solar panels were unpacked. Irrigation systems were tested. Local villagers were trained. Women were hired as managers. Traoré even carried the first pipe to the trench himself. For the next 6 hours, the dry land turned into a site of action. A BBC journalist tried to ask about Kamala Harris's comment, but Traoré didn't even look up. If she wants answers, he said, she can come here and ask the ground. Meanwhile, in Washington, Kamala Harris sat with Secretary Blinken, looking at fresh satellite images. He's building live. Blinken said, Kamala didn't flinch. Then we make sure the world sees it as a stunt. But it was already too late. African leaders were texting each other. TikTok was full of clips showing Traoré lifting a pipe with captions like posturing. This looks like building. 3 days after Traoré arrived at Zone 7, the red dirt was already changing. Canals were forming. Once dead plants now stood green in the heat. But the biggest surprise wasn't the progress, it was that Traoré never left. No limos, no palace, no fancy suits. He slept in a simple container with a fan and a flashlight. He ate what the workers ate: millet porridge, boiled yam, and every morning before sunrise, he walked the site with a clipboard, asking villagers what they needed. The news spread fast. Al Jazeera sent a team. France 24 followed. Even a CNN anchor who once mocked Traoré for being just for show flew to Ouagadougou to see what he called a miracle in motion. And when that anchor finally found Traoré sitting under a mango tree with two barefoot engineers reviewing crop maps, he didn't say a word. He just paused, stunned. This isn't the image I expected, the CNN anchor admitted, sliding his sunglasses up onto his head. Traoré barely glanced at him and said, that's because you've spent more time looking at palaces than at fields. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., Kamala Harris was under growing pressure. A Senate subcommittee demanded a briefing on Burkina Faso, and whispers in Congress suggested that her remarks had only boosted Traoré's global popularity. Then a bombshell hit. The African Development Bank announced a $50 million grant, not to the government of Burkina Faso, but directly to Zone 7. The world was no longer waiting for America to lead. They were investing in something they could see real progress, covered in dust but powered by action. When a reporter asked Harris about the grant, her response was stiff. If this is real, then good. But let's see if it lasts. That same night, Traoré stood in a field glowing with solar lanterns, surrounded by children reading their school books under LED lights for the first time. He turned to his assistant, a woman named Aminata, and said, she still thinks this is about her. Aminata smiled, but everyone else knows it's about them. Washington had always liked to believe it set the pace for the world. When America spoke, others adjusted. When it funded, others followed. But now, something was shifting. U.S. officials were watching Traoré instead. Harris's office grew tense. Polls showed young Americans were sharing clips of his speeches, calling him the leader who listens. Opinion pieces popped up with titles like Why Africa Doesn't Need Us Anymore and the Burkinabe Blueprint. The phrase Zone 7 was trending in more than 20 countries. One morning, during a private security meeting, Kamala Harris slammed a folder shut and stared across the table at a senior State Department official. I want him discredited. The room went silent. Madam Vice President, the official said carefully, he hasn't insulted us. He hasn't even refused aid. He's just showing a different way. Harris's voice snapped back. That's exactly the problem. Meanwhile, Traoré was walking barefoot with engineers. checking solar panels on a ridge above Zone 7. The land below was changing color, patches of green spreading across what used to be dry, cracked soil. Farmers weren't just working, they were dreaming again. That evening, a journalist from the Washington Post approached him and asked, "Mr. President," she held her notebook and asked, "how do you respond to people who say this is all just for show, that you're only doing this to get attention on the world stage?" Traoré paused, then looked straight into the camera. "Let them come," he said calmly. "Let them walk this land. Let them taste the dust we've swallowed. Let them feel the water flowing where there was once nothing. This isn't a performance. This is building." That quote went viral overnight. By morning, the New York Times headline read, "Posture, he's building. Harris's dismissal sparks global debate." Kamala Harris read it first thing. Her tone changed. She immediately called her communications director and said, "Book me a town hall. I need to speak directly to the American people before he speaks again." But it was already too late. Traoré had become more than just a leader, he had become proof that real change doesn't need permission from the top. That evening, under the bright lights of a Michigan town hall, Harris stood firm, dressed sharp, her words carefully chosen. The room was packed with university students and local workers. Cameras were everywhere. She started with a firm tone, "I believe in progress, but real progress needs planning, structure, and stability, not just dramatic gestures and rebellious symbolism." Everyone knew who she meant, even though she didn't say his name. But the audience didn't stay quiet for long. A student in the back stood up. "With all due respect, Madam Vice President," she asked, "how is growing your own food or building your own power grid symbolic? Isn't that exactly what America was built on?" The crowd murmured. Harris hesitated. "Context matters," she replied. "Burkina Faso's situation is complicated. It's not that simple." Just then, the big screens behind her glitched. Instead of her talking points, a live feed appeared, Traoré speaking from a village gathering in Ouagadougou. There was no stage, no flag, just people around him. He didn't even know he was being streamed in the US, but someone had switched the feed. "For years we were told that we needed permission to dream," he said. "That growth had to be managed from far away. We listened, we obeyed, and we stayed hungry." Then he looked at the people around him and said, "No more." In Michigan, the room fell completely silent. Traoré continued, "We don't disrespect anyone, but we won't kneel for scraps when we can grow our own food." Back in the US, Kamala Harris's eyes narrowed as the live feed was suddenly cut. Her aides rushed to regain control of the room, but the damage was already done. Clips of the unexpected livestream flooded social media. People were saying, while Kamala explained leadership, Traoré just showed it. Harris left the stage without taking more questions, her face revealing what her words didn't. This wasn't just a PR moment anymore. Something had shifted, and she wasn't controlling the story anymore. The fallout spread fast. News outlets scrambled to cover what had happened. One headline read, "A vice president on defense." Another called Traoré a foreign leader, uninvited, but now impossible to ignore. The next morning, Harris sat silently in a West Wing conference room, watching the town hall replay on mute. Her team spoke softly, careful not to say what they were all thinking. The American public had just seen her overshadow Dan. Traoré didn't even try. Finally, her media advisor broke the silence. "We can still spin this. Let's frame it as an open conversation about different visions for the future." Kamala didn't reply right away. She stared at the screen, frozen on Traoré, sleeves rolled up, boots dusty, surrounded by villagers. "No," she said sharply, "this isn't about spin. He's winning people over because they believe him." The room went quiet. Across the ocean, Traoré sat in a simple round hut, surrounded by village elders, engineers, and young women with laptops next to farmers in work boots. He hadn't seen the US town hall or realized how much impact the livestream had. But he noticed something new. One aide leaned in and said, "Mr. President, we're seeing a surge in requests, mostly from US universities and private donors. They want to visit the rice farms, the water projects, the solar fields." Traoré nodded. "Let them come," he said calmly, "but not as tourists. If they come, they work. They listened. Then, a phone call came from Washington, an official invitation. Kamala Harris wanted a one-on-one televised conversation with Traoré. No press statements. No middlemen. Just the two of them face to face. Traoré smiled not because he felt proud, but because he knew what the invitation really meant. She was no longer ignoring him. She now understood the importance of what he stood for. The room was set up like a formal summit, but everyone watching knew this wasn't just politics, it was real. The cameras rolled. 2 chairs, 1 long table. On one side sat Kamala Harris, sharp in a navy blazer. On the other sat Ibrahim Traoré, calm, dressed in earth-toned traditional cloth. The moderator welcomed the global audience, then leaned back and let them begin. Kamala went first. "Let's be clear, Captain Traoré," she said firmly. "The U.S. has invested billions into your region for food, healthcare, and roads. That's not posturing, that's doing the right thing." Traoré nodded slightly and replied, "If it was right, why did the help stop when we stopped?" Following orders, Kamala's face tightened. "This isn't about obedience, it's about partnership." Traoré leaned forward and replied, "Partnership with conditions isn't partnership, it's control." The room went quiet. Even the moderator hesitated. Kamala quickly pushed back. "And what you're doing rejecting aid, using strong words instead of diplomacy, isn't that posturing?" Traoré stared directly at her. "I don't just talk, I build. Look at the land reforms, the new schools, the water systems. They don't need speeches, they grow on their own." Kamala opened her mouth to respond, then paused. For a second, doubt crossed her face. Round the world, people were watching on TV, phones, in coffee shops. On social media, hashtags exploded. Hashtag TRA or acute vis Harris. Hashtag real leadership. Hashtag Africa rises. A student in Atlanta tweeted, "Traoré isn't just defending Africa, he's redefining what power means." Back in the studio, the moderator finally asked, "Madam Vice President, your response?" Kamala forced a smile and said, "I think the captain truly believes in his vision. Let's just hope it lasts." But Traoré didn't smile back. "Let's just hope it spreads." The debate was over, but its impact had just begun. Within minutes, clips of Traoré's calm reply went viral. Millions of people watched the moment he said, "Let's just hope it spreads," over and over again. It wasn't just a line, it felt like a promise. In Dar es Salaam, students packed university halls, cheering like it was a football final. In Baltimore, a podcast host said, "This wasn't just a debate, it was a shift. You could feel the world turning." Traoré returned quietly to his hotel, without a big team or loud celebration. His assistant Marie walked beside him, reading news updates on her phone. "Sir," she said, "BBC's headline reads, 'Traoré stuns Harris in live debate.' CNN called it a paradigm challenge." He smiled lightly and said, "They can call it whatever they want. Our people know what it really was." Meanwhile, in Washington, Kamala Harris sat with her team, trying to recover. Her advisors wrote statements and responses, but she stopped them. "No," she said, "let it settle. If we respond too fast, we look afraid." One aide spoke carefully, "But Vice President," it looked like he won. Kamala didn't answer. She just stared out the window, her jaw tight. Back in Africa, Traoré's message was spreading fast. Leaders from Kenya, Ghana, and even the Caribbean reached out, asking to meet him. Agricultural officials wanted details about Burkina Faso's self-reliance projects. Western experts were shocked, trying to explain how a 36-year-old from Ouagadougou had challenged the world's top powers live. In the streets of his city, posters of Traoré popped up everywhere, not from the government, but from local artists. One mural showed him standing beside a broken chain with the words, "We're building," a young girl named Aisha watching. The debate on a small TV with her father turned and said, "Papa, I want to be like him." Her father, with tears in his eyes, nodded slowly, "So do I." The next day, Traoré stood at the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa. The room was packed. Leaders from across the continent were there, whispering, waiting. Reporters held their breath. Everyone wanted to hear what he would say next. After the debate that had stunned the world, Traoré stepped up to the podium, not with arrogance, but with the calm of a man who knew that every word was a brick, and he was still building something bigger. I didn't come here to win arguments, he began, voice steady. I came here to build something, Traoré said. He paused, letting the silence speak louder than words, then continued, for years, we've spent our time reacting to the world, apologizing, explaining, hoping to be accepted. But now, it's time to create. The entire room went still. You could feel people holding their breath. Even Kamala Harris, watching live from Washington, leaned in, not with anger, but with something closer to respect. She realized she had misjudged him. Back in Addis Ababa, Traoré stepped down from the podium and walked into the audience, pointing to delegates one by one. You, he said to the Sierra Leone representative, your country built community healing systems after war, others copied you. Then he turned to another. You, Segal, created solar grids without IMF loans, without headlines, but you did it. He looked around the room and said, we're done waiting to be saved. We're done pretending. The world doesn't need our silence, it needs our example. The room erupted, not just with applause, but with real emotion. Leaders stood, some clapped, some cried, but everyone felt something shift, something long buried break free. Later that day, Traoré was at a dusty construction site outside Ouagadougou. Children stood nearby, watching engineers lay bricks for a new research center. One boy asked, Mr. President, is this the building you talked about on TV? Traoré knelt beside him, smiled, and said, no, this is just the beginning. The real building is what happens inside you. As the sun set, he walked back to his car, dust on his boots, blueprints in hand, no cameras, no speeches, just action. They once said he was only posturing, just a symbol. But Ibrahim Traoré didn't raise his voice to impress. While others gave speeches, he laid the foundation. While headlines searched for drama, he built in silence. And now that the world is watching, he doesn't need to shout. He simply points to what's already growing. In a world full of noise, he chose work. In rooms filled with talk, he chose to build. And now, across continents and generations, his message is louder than any microphone. Dignity, progress, and purpose don't need permission, they just need to begin.